Now, on our last broadcast, we spoke about agendas and deceptions and how they sometimes come in the disguise of things that outwardly appear to be harmless. And they use such words as equality and civil rights, tolerance, choice, and many other words like that. But what I found out when you really look into it, when you discover what the true agenda really is, you understand that they use these disguises to cover the darkness that they bring. And I'm telling you, this is evil. We have evil agendas that are meant to destroy this nation, to destroy our families. Now, like I said before, we're bringing back our good friend Colin Gunn today. And we're going to discuss the radical agendas that are being promoted in our public school system. And for those who are new to the show, Colin is a documentary filmmaker. And he probably has, I got to tell you, it's probably one of the best documentary films I've ever seen. It's entertaining, but it's so educational and informative, and it speaks the truth. He is a truth warrior. The film's called Indoctrination, Public Schools and the Decline of Christianity in America. And again, this is a must-see film. So, excuse me if I'm a little excited about today's broadcast, but I love having Colin on. He's just a fellow truth warrior. He's a man that he has such a love for America. He has such a love for people, and he put this film together because of his love for people, because he wants to really show them that the system that they're in right now is a system that will enslave them, that's meant to destroy them. So again, I'm excited about this. Now, what I have to say is that there are radical agendas that are being forced upon us and our children. And this is especially evident in our public schools. And it's been happening for decades. This isn't something that's new. This process started back in the 1800s. Now, in the last few weeks, we've seen violence once again at our schools. And we can't forget about Columbine. Columbine basically brought this issue to a head. It demonstrated to us that something was amiss in our schools. Now, last time I had Colin on, I talked about my time in the school system. And we'll probably hit on that again during today's show. But I just remember being in the school system and looking at all the millions of dollars that were being spent to keep the children safe, from the threats that were coming from the outside. But the problem was really from the inside. And it's one that we're not addressing. We're so willing to spend all this money on different types of these educational programs for our children, teaching them about anti-bullying, anti-drugs, anti-gangs. But the problem here is that we're anti-God. We have all these administrators and all these educational professionals that have all these big certificates and degrees and doctorates, and they're a doctor in this, a doctor in that. But they have no common sense. I worked with many of these people. There was no common sense there. They always had these new ways and theories of how they could fix the problem and better help our children. They're getting paid $100,000, $200,000, and they're not fixing the problem because they have no idea of what is truly wrong. And they're not addressing what is truly wrong. And when you tell them that the answer is God, is that we've removed God from the system, they don't want to hear about it. They're doing everything but addressing what the true problem is. What I want everyone to understand today, everyone that's listening to this broadcast, is that when you send your children to a public school, you're sending them into a Babylonian system, into a den of ungodliness. And you're taking a chance. You're taking a great risk of losing your child, and that's the truth. 90% of Christian parents send their children to schools. And let's think about that. We're sending our children to a school, to a system that despises the name of Jesus Christ, that are going to present to them agendas that go against what we believe, that are going to put things out there that we know are wrong, that we know that are morally wrong, and they're going to try to spin it to make it look normal, to put a positive light on it. And we're putting them into a place that will never address issues from a Christian perspective. I hear so many Christians complaining about the school system, but if we just took our kids out of the school, that system would fall. It would fail because there would be no one there to support it. But we don't do that. Instead, we allow our children to be indoctrinated by their twisted morality and their twisted agendas, their twisted stances. Just think about the things that they're teaching your children. You know, you're allowing your children to be taught their stance on abortion. You know, the other day when we had Bradley Dean on, he was talking about how the news media was putting up all this resistance to what he was doing, and they showed 2 photos of an abortion to the children, and everybody was outraged in the media. You know, a media that supports abortion. You see, what I think is so crazy about this is that they support abortion. So when you show people the product of their abortion, well, now they're offended because they understand that when people see what abortion truly is, that it is indeed the killing of a baby, people will be like, wow, what I've been taught is so wrong. What I'm seeing on that table is a dead baby. That's murder. And that's why they stand against it, because they don't want the truth to be revealed. Because when you put light onto darkness, what happens? The darkness flees. The darkness will flee. Look at all the things that your children are being taught. They're being taught a false history of this nation. They're being taught agendas that come against the family structure. They teach them that the state is their savior. And why do you think we become such a slave nation? A nation that is so dependent upon the government. A nation where everybody's hand is out. Give me this, give me that. I want free contraception because I should be able to have sex with whoever I want, but I don't want to pay for it. Our children are being taught lies. And all I have to say is, look how far this nation has fallen. And you know why it's fallen? It's because we have failed to stand up. But there's going to be, I know there's hope. I know that there is hope. Because I am seeing strong men and women of faith who are standing up for something. They're standing up for what they believe in. They're standing up for the truth. They're standing up for Jesus Christ. And I'm seeing people out there right now who are not compromising and not accepting things that are not of God. And we need to support people like that, because they are truly beacons in the darkness. They are shedding light on these dark and evil agendas. And my promise is that I am going to keep on doing this as long as I'm able to. As long as we are able to put this program on the radio, we're going to do it. And we're going to support those who are standing boldly in the Word of God. I'm also reminded that, less than 3% of Americans stood up against a tyrannical government. And because they stood up, because they took a stand, a nation was born. A nation that was a blessing to God. But what I'm seeing now is that less than 3% of this nation is standing up for radical agendas. And they're being allowed to destroy this nation. But no more. A revival is taking place. Restoration is happening. There is hope. Because so many are beginning to join this movement. They're getting off of the indoctrination train and saying, I'm not taking this anymore. We've given you the ball for so long, and look what you've done. You've led this nation down a path of tyranny, and you're leading this nation straight to hell, and we're not going to stand for it anymore. People, we've got to wake up. We've got to stand for something. If you don't stand for something, you will never be anything. You will be nothing. And you're going to lose your souls in the process. It's time to take a stand for Jesus because He is the answer. He is the truth. And He is what we need right now to break the chains of bondage to this fallen world and this evil, fallen system. I'll be right back. And welcome back to the Tough Love Show, right here on the Hope is Alive Radio Network. And again, I'm so excited to have back with us Colin Gunn, who has a wonderful film, and I encourage all of you to get this. It's called Indoctrination, Public Schools, and the Decline of Christianity in America. Colin, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me back on your show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's such a wonderful movie, and it's it's entertaining, but it's also so informative, and it's something that we all need to really watch. And I got to tell you, Colin, after having you on the program, I mean, you know what transpired in my family's life. After watching that film and speaking to you, we took our children out of the public schools, and we partnered with Class, who is one of the organizations that's in your movie, and they've been so amazing, and I'm telling you, that's the best move I've ever made because it's biblical, and I'm once again in control of my children's education. So I got to thank you for that.
Well, Ray, I don't think you'll ever regret that decision. I've never met any homeschoolers who realize who have decided to take their kids out of the public schools. It's something that changes their lives, and of course, yeah, we know there's work involved in it and there's responsibility, but the rewards are endless. And the fact is, you'll be closer to your kids. You'll be able to nurture them. You'll bring them up in the faith, and they're protected. They're in your care, finally. You know, these kids out there in the public schools, they're subject to every philosophy, every temptation from both their peers and the indoctrination that comes from these public school teachers. You're in a great position now to really enact reformation through your own life, which is your ministry, your show, but also you're going to be raising your children as warriors for the Lord. And that is going to be blessed. Your faithfulness there will be blessed. And this is how we're going to change the culture in America. It's not going to come through political action. It's going to come through this, where we have children remaining in the faith, following the ways of their Father, and being Christians and applying the Word of God to every area of life. So I commend you. You should be commended. It's a difficult thing sometimes to do, but I appreciate that we had a small part in it, and I'm thankful that we were able to help people get this information. That's our goal. We're not going to be judging anyone for using the public schools. We're just going to say, look, here is the information, and that's the information in our film.
Amen to that. And I got to say wow right now, because the movie has really taken off since the last time we've spoken. And, just tell us right now about some of the recent awards that you guys just received.
Well, we're overwhelmed. It really is unbelievable. And I think we talked to you early on without any inkling of how this is all going to work out with, Christian films and especially Christian documentaries. We never expected that we would have such an amazing result. We released this film in October last year, and since then my full-time job has been traveling around the country talking about this subject. That is a change in my life. But it's a wonderful change because this is, I believe, the most important thing I could be doing right now, and that's talking about the issue of indoctrination in our public schools. Recently, we just won Best Documentary at the San Antonio Independent Christian Film Festival, and we were also runner-up for the Best of Festival Award, which is quite an honor, and we were really privileged to be there in San Antonio and receive those awards. But those awards are part of this large-scale encouragement of the project. People know this is a timely issue. People know this is an important film, and people are seeing this film, and that's what we're doing. We're doing screenings across the country, all across the country over the next few months.
That's so great, and I'm so happy to hear that, because it really was, again, I'm not just saying that because, I'm friends with Colin now, but this was probably one of the best movies that I've ever seen, and it's a documentary, but I'm telling you, it is so engaging, and you have to get it. You really do. It's going to make a difference in your life. But Colin, we're on a bunch of new stations now, and I want to hit some of the questions that I hit last time with you, just to give maybe some of the new listeners who haven't had the opportunity to listen to the program. I just want them to know a little bit about you. So can you just tell us just give us a brief summary about yourself?
Well, I'm a homeschool dad of 8, and I'm from Scotland, but I moved to Texas, where my wife is from. And from here in Texas, we decided we are going to make a movie, because we realized I've been involved in politics for a long time. I realized, can we fix any of these things politically? All the problems, homosexual marriage or socialism, or all the issues in our society, we can't fix them because of the indoctrination centers, the public schools, which teach children a form of atheism. So what are we going to do about it? My desire was to get on the road, and we got in a big yellow school bus, and we drove around the country examining this issue, which is about public education. And we went back in history 200 years as we drove to places like Boston to ask about the beginning of compulsory education in America. Went to New Harmony, Indiana, and Dayton, Tennessee, where they did the Scopes trial. All these places to give anyone that watches our film a panoramic view. And it's a fun film. You're traveling. We're seeing all these things. We're meeting amazing people. We're interviewing whistleblowers, people who are part of the system, and hearing their testimony about the public school system. So at the end of it all, this film isn't just my opinion. We made extra effort to make sure this film has irrefutable evidence that really is powerful, because it's coming from the inside. It's coming from teachers, elementary school teachers, and experts that really know what they're talking about.
No, you're right about that. It's not your opinion. It's very factual based. And what happens is, and I've said this so many times, but there are many agendas that are going on in these schools. And I have to put it out there that these agendas, they're evil. And we have got to support Colin for what he's doing, because when you start speaking the truth, darkness is it's doing everything it can to come at this man. So we need to really stand boldly for him and say we're going to support him because he's speaking the truth. And I got to put one thing out there real quick, Colin. And again, I really want you to get into this today and really hit this topic. But less than 3% of Americans were the ones who started a revolution that founded this nation. And now we're allowing less than 3% to destroy it. So I see hope in that statement, because hope begins with people like you, Colin, and I really do commend you for what you've done. But let's dive into this now. I want to talk a little bit about the communist influence behind the public school system, and how one of their tenets was to essentially capture the minds of our children through free education.
Well, that's true, and people don't realize that. They think of the public school system as being something that's all American. It's got the sports, it's got the feel of American life. But what we look back at, when we look back into the 1800s, those that established the public school system, a lot of them were utopianists, and shared the ideology with Marx. Of course, Marx, the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto was free public school education for everybody, because those guys knew that to change culture in their mind, you got the children away from the parents. The parents had all these old ideas, and often they were Christian ideas that limited their progressive views, so they couldn't enact their progressive views without getting the children away. Once you get the children away from the parents, you've got them to mold into shape, and that's how they change culture. And that is what we need to be aware of. When you send your child to that public school system, it is not just something, they're not just going to learn math and a little bit of math or a little bit of biology or science. They're being given a worldview, and that worldview is, at the end of it, anti-Christian. And we have evidence in our film. We go and we look at the people that established it, people like Robert Owen, who was an atheist, Horace Mann, who was a Unitarian. Unitarian means that they don't believe that Christ was God, and so therefore they don't believe that Christ is king over our nation, and that had an impact. And then you start to look at the other people that came in. You had Darwin coming along, you had G. Stanley Hall, who was a Freudian, then you had John Dewey, who was a humanist. The public schools have been influenced by a host of philosophers, and their children are being affected by that philosophy even today. So we look at what's going on in our public schools, and everyone knows there's a huge problem. Why are we having all these terrible things happening in our public schools? Well, what we're looking at is the application of years of this anti-Christian philosophy coming to fruition. That's what we're seeing.
No, that's so true. And what I wanted to talk about quickly is just how Europe, when we look at Europe, we can see ourselves 10 years down the road. And what we're seeing happening in Europe is beginning to happen here in America. And I just want you to talk a little bit about that.
Well, Europe's always been further down the line with a lot of things, and progressives in America look to Europe as a model for socialism or progressive ideas. So when we see healthcare coming up as an issue here, well, we've seen models of it overseas in throughout Europe and Great Britain. Now, that has been true for a long time. The progressives have all philosophically, and that actually happened when Horace Mann looked to the Prussian model of education, which was an orderly, age-segregated, slightly militaristic approach to education, and that coincided with the Industrial Revolution model with people like Robert Owen, who ran mills and factories, and they looked at that and they wanted something that reflected that, and that's what they brought to America. So when we look at the American public school education system, we realize, just like it is today with the progressives looking overseas to find socialism and bring it over here, we saw that way back in 200 years ago when these progressives like Robert Owen and Horace Mann were looking to another model. So this public school, this American public school system, it isn't even American. It's not American in the sense that it's a borrowed model. So we need to be aware of that. The model that we had before that, with the one-room schoolhouse, a lot of freedom in education, a lot of homeschooling, that was the model that was more traditionally American. So we're exhorting Americans to realize that homeschooling is not alternative education. It was the fundamental element of education, where children learned with their parents. They were taught to read by their parents, and they spent most of their time with their parents. And of course, what do we find? They were all maturer quicker. They were running businesses in their early teens. They were doing amazing things, and they were incredibly well educated. And now look where we are. We have a dumbed-down populace that really doesn't know anything about the Bible or about what the Lord's will is, and we see this, and there's a reason for it, and it's the public school system in America.
No, that's so right, and we see such a decline, a major decline in Europe with Christianity, and how's that working out for them? I mean, we see it's not working out too well. But we're going to take a short break, and we come back, we're going to have more with Colin Gunn.
If I had my way, government education would be brought to a halt.
Trying to fix public education is like trying to teach a pig how to dance. You get dirty and the pig gets mad.
Turning your children over to total strangers and having those strangers work on your child's mind, it's a mad idea.
Public schools have become a criminal enterprise.
Parents are willing to admit that there are these problems and yet believe that their children will somehow escape. They won't.
And it may have taken a school shooting to wake us up, to see the danger, but that's a very small danger compared to all the other things that go on that can destroy our children.
Traveling in a school bus with his family and a film crew, Colin Gunn is on a quest to discover the origins of our modern educational system. Indoctrination, Public Schools, and the Decline of Christianity in America.
And welcome back to the Tough Love Show, right here on the Hope is Alive Radio Network. Again, I am with Colin Gunn, who is the writer-producer of Indoctrination, Public Schools, and the Decline of Christianity in America. This is a must-see film. I highly recommend it. And so, Colin, first off, I want to talk about the American church. And I want to talk about Christians. 90% of Christians are allowing their children to attend public schools. And I also see within the church we have two, ways of thinking. Some see it as, we want to have Christian children in schools. And others are saying, no, we need to take our children out of the schools to protect them and to do what God told us to do with the teaching of our own children. Where do you stand on that?
What we're seeing is unbelievable. You can see this big reliance on the government for educating the children of Christians. I mean, it's almost shameful. If you could imagine, if you went into a church and 90% of them were on welfare, you would want to meet the deacons, right, and ask them what's going on. But if you go into the average American church, 90% of the children there are being educated by this other system, this government system. And there's an ignorance about what that means. First, that means something. The first thing it means is that parents have abdicated their responsibility there. They're responsible for their children's knowledge and their education and their reading. And what's happened is that we've passed that along to someone else. The second part of it, and the tragedy, is that Christians who trust the public school system aren't getting what they think they're getting. They think they're getting some education. Of course, the public schools aren't even good at that. But the biggest problem is these public schools teach an implied atheism. Sometimes it's overt. Sometimes they'll be particularly anti-Christian. We have stories of that in our film. But what's particularly the problem is that those children grow up as effective atheists because they're taught about the world as though God doesn't exist. Or they're taught about the world as though the existence of God doesn't really matter at all. And so they sit through all these classes and they learn to become humanists and atheists by default. They're learning science, and instead of what we would say as Christians, that science, the purpose of it is to give glory to the Creator as we marvel at all the incredible things He does. Instead, in the public schools, these things are just abstract facts that the child learns so that he can pass a test and move on to the next thing. And to us, that's not what the purpose of education should be. The purpose of education, in my mind, and this could be, homeschoolers could get this wrong, or Christian schoolers can get this wrong, but the purpose of education, in my mind, is always to bring glory to God. When we marvel at the providence through history, so we look at history, we marvel at all the things that He's done, raising up kings, destroying nations, building up our own country, looking back at our own country, these wonderful things, that's God's work. And so when we study from a Christian perspective, there's an entirely different way of doing it than in the public schools. And so as Christians rely on the public schools, we're seeing lots of people walk away from the faith. They're turning their hearts from the Lord because they're indoctrinated in a humanistic way of thinking, and the result is they leave the faith of their family, and that's the saddest thing.
Yeah, it is sad. And I was speaking to some parents before about the issue of homeschooling, and you hit the nail right on the head. Personal responsibility. We don't see how this government, the system that has been put in place for decades and decades, has indoctrinated the people so much that we are actually slaves to a system. And when you speak to Christian parents and you say, we have a responsibility to teach our children, the first thing that they say to me is, well, that doesn't fit into my schedule. How am I supposed to do that? And they're coming to me for, ways of telling them how to do it. And all I say is, I'm telling you what God's word is saying. You're the one that's got to make the difference in your life by, readjusting things. It's not easy to homeschool. It's not easy to raise your children, but it's all about sacrifice. And as Christians, we have to say, do I want to lose my children to a system that's going to lead them straight to hell? Or am I going to stand boldly for God's word and make sacrifices in my life to make sure that my children are raised in the word and knowledge of God? And I think that's where we're at right now, Colin.
Yeah, I'm seeing that as well. There is a remarkable sacrifice to homeschool. But if you want to do it, you can do it. That's the story I'm hearing all across America, is that when they see our film and they're also aware of all the things that are going on in the public schools, and we outline some of them, and the argument in our film is, for even in the best schools, you see all these problems. So in the best schools in America, best public schools, and that includes rural schools, you have guns and drugs and sex and violence. And these things are introduced into children's lives at an age that no one would find acceptable, but there's no way to fix it. And so what we're finding is people are looking to homeschooling as an alternative, and they're really desperate to rescue their kids. And so I have to encourage people all the time, as hard as homeschooling is, there's a wonderful comfort in the safety that your children will now have. You're not going to be fixing problems as they come up later, as the children get involved in all these things. You don't want your daughter to come home pregnant. You don't want your boys to be taking drugs or to put on drugs by the schools. This happens as well with Ritalin and all the rest of it. You don't want these things to happen to your children. Bringing them home, although it seems like work, actually, I think in the long run will be a peace of mind, will be a comfort to you that you're doing the right thing. And I believe the Lord will bless you as well as you abdicate your responsibility by putting your kids in the public school. You're really creating a permanent damage in your relationship between yourself and your children, and that's something that can be fixed. The homeschooling movement is not the richest movement in the world. There's no one that is finding homeschooling easy because they have lots of money. There's a lot of poor people that just homeschool, but you know what? They make it their priority. They put their children first, so they do without the second car. They put up with a smaller home or whatever it takes, because mom usually has to come home, and that's a big part of the sacrifice. But you know what? They make it happen because they're putting their kids first.
Well, you don't understand, Colin. I live in an upper middle class neighborhood, and my school's ranked in the top 5. So it's not my school; it's everybody else's school. How many times have you heard that?
I hear it all the time, and I think there's a form of self-deception. This is really how I felt just talking to people in America. Why are they still using the public schools? Well, that's one of the arguments that they give you. Of course, we know statistically, and we mention it in the film, that everyone grades their own school higher than the rest of the schools in the nation. Of course, that can't be true for everyone. There has to be bad schools out there somewhere, but everyone thinks their school is different. So we look at the good schools, and we cover that in the film, where we go to the good schools and see all these awful things happening. Columbine was a good school. That was in a nice area, nice middle-class area. Of course, we know what happened there. You're always subject to the ideologies because, of course, it's a huge, gigantic monopoly that's a top-down system from the Department of Education, which makes schools push the homosexual agenda, makes schools favorable towards Planned Parenthood and other ideologies and environmentalism and all these ideas that are coming from the top down. But the main thing is that the public schools themselves, actually as a context, are really subject to our culture. And all the things you don't like going on in culture right now are right there in the public schools, because the teachers don't have any moral authority to say to kids, you can't do this, you can't do that. We're really in this Lord of the Flies situation in the public schools with peers introducing each other. So your children are only going to be as good as the worst parent in your neighborhood, because the worst parent allows the kids access through their cell phones, through their lives, to all the violent video games, games and all the stuff that's going on, your kids are going to get access to it. I know when I went to public schools, experiencing all of that, and that was before the internet, and I didn't go home and tell my mom, about all the things that was going on in my life. And so you really have to see the dangers and the threat to your child, what they're going to be introduced, not just from the teachers, but their peers as well.
No, that's so true, and it's all schools. We have to put that out there. You know, I was when I was a police officer, I also worked in the public school setting, and then I worked for a short time as a security director in another state as within a public school, and it was amazing that, and I said this earlier on the program, but we spend millions of dollars on all this security to keep the threat from the outside coming into our children, and we're failing to see that the threat is really on the inside. That's where the threat is at. And it's not just the other children that your kids are going to interact with, but it's the teachers pushing their agendas. And it's just amazing to me that anyone that speaks against these agendas, I mean, they are just ridiculed. I mean, the other day I had Bradley Dean on the show, who did an assembly in a school system, and they talked about anti-abortion and homosexuality, things like that. And wow, I mean, just the amount of attacks that he was getting. Are you guys seeing any such attacks on the film and on you personally?
We're not getting a lot of attacks, and I think, I mean, the Lord's blessing us not to be getting into any trouble. I think our film is honest. We took extra care in our film to be gracious towards those within the system, those that are trying to fix it. Even although we don't agree with them, we try and make it clear that our goal is towards Christian parents who are still using the public schools that need to hear the truths in our film. But one of the sides of that is our film is, I believe, very authentic. It's not just my opinion. We're bringing these eyewitnesses to testify to these issues, and it's hard to refute an eyewitness testimony. We have people like Sarah Laverdier and Mike Matarko and Robert Ziegler, who are all teachers. Mike himself is an elementary school teacher, and they're all in the system, and we interview them, and we get their story about what's going on. And so it's hard for them to refute it. And I think while there's maybe a reaction, and we see it, you know, we get mean messages on YouTube and all the rest of it, which is usually not the thinkers anyway, you know, but I think thoughtful people who see our film, I think they can see the case that we're trying to make, and I think we're being successful in that. We are seeing people take their kids out of the schools as a result of the film, although I don't believe it's just the film. I think we just kind of do the visuals. We put these stories in front of their eyes, and it just becomes so hard for them to deny the overwhelming evidence. And I think when they do, there has to be some radical form of self-deception going on to convince themselves that what they're doing is right.
Right. No, well, the Synagogue of Satan is also strategic, and I'm sure they don't want anybody, they don't want to give any publicity to your film because, like you said, you guys are speaking the truth, and it's factual based. And I had put our first interview up on the YouTube site, and I'm got to tell you, 99% of the comments were very, very positive. But that 1%, all it was just a rant, a basic, you know, coming at you with disgusting language and things like that. And what I realized is that there was no factual basis. It's just whenever you shed light on darkness, darkness will flee. And when it flees, it's going to be yelling too. So I just...
Usually...
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, when we get people that are angry at us, the first thing I ask them is if have they seen the movie? Usually they haven't seen the movie. Usually they're actually angry at Christians, you know, so they're already they're not committed to the Lord, so they have that devilish approach to dealing with Christians, kind of hatred. Christians themselves, even those in the system, and we take some, you know, pretty heavy swings at the public school system and the teachers that are involved in the public school system. We don't pull our punches. Even the teachers in the public schools come to me, and even although they're staying in the system, they're saying, Colin, it's worse than you're saying in your film, and they give examples of what's going on in their school. You know, it's interesting that the teachers in the system say to me, you know, the big problem for them having a hard time teaching is parental abdication. And of course, that's my key point, is that the public school system subsidizes parental abdication. The same way any form of welfare subsidizes non-work. And so when we can't fix the system like Arnie Duncan is trying to do by extending the school day or putting more money into the system or being open, Sundays. That's what he's planning. So they expand the system, of course, makes it more expensive, but what's happening is parents will have more reason to abdicate their responsibility as they drop their children off on the doors of the public school system. So the fix, in my mind, isn't reforming the schools, getting the Bible or prayer back in there. The fix is to depart, to flee, to retreat, and to do what we should be doing, take on our responsibility as Christian parents to educate our children.
That's so true. There's no law that's going to restore order. There's nothing that the school can do or that we can do by voting to restore the system. The only answer here, and you're pointing that out, is Jesus Christ, and by us standing by what the Word of God is telling us to do, and that is taking our kids out of a Babylonian system that is a socialist system where you are turning your children over to the state for the state to raise them. And I think that's so true what you just said. Now, what I wanted to do right now, Colin, is there any way that you can just give us a few examples? I know you guys did a tremendous amount of research for this film, and I just wanted you to give some examples of what you guys are seeing within the school system with, these different agendas and these programs that are being put in place. And again, I got to let the listeners know that a lot of these agendas are coming under a disguise of something that looks good. We see the anti-bullying campaigns that are going into the school. But when you really look into what that anti-bullying campaign is all about, it's all about implementing the homosexual agenda. And I've seen that. I've worked in a school system. I know it's true. I'm not telling a story. This is true. But Colin, I just want to turn it over to you, and if you can share with us any stories that you found during your research.
Well, what we're finding, and we had our ideology to start with about the public school system, but when we made the film, the hardest part for us is to hear the stories of what's going on in the public school system. We give one example in our film, which testifies to what you're saying about the homosexual agenda. Sarah Laverdiere is a really sweet and kind Christian woman who was teaching in a public school, and she gave the example of one of the children in the school called another kid gay, and one of the other teachers came up and rebuked that child and said to that child, "You don't know if you're gay or not." And we see that there's this homosexual propaganda within the school system. So, people send their kids to the school and they say, "My teacher's real nice, she's a Christian, she goes to church, we know her." But what happens is there's many people within the system that have that message that they're trying to push. We see it when we see in our film. We cover the topic through a video that was produced. It's called It's Elementary, and we have clips of that documentary in our film that shows what goes on. And they use a system of values modification where they bring up subjects in a neutral way to very young children, and they question them. They teach relativism by bringing the subject of homosexual marriage up, and ask the question, well, some people think this, and what do you think of this? And of course, it's propaganda. It's designed to make the child a relativist by introducing them to antithetical, anti-Christian ideas at a young age, so that as they grow up, they start to question their parents. And one of the stories we've heard in California is it was a good Christian home. It was parents who were homeschooling. They put their child into the public school, and after a few years, that child is coming home pointing at the parents saying, "You're bigots, because you believe that homosexuality is wrong." And so the schools, and that's heartbreaking. Can you imagine how heartbreaking that is for Christian parents to have their kids come home and be called names? But that's what's happened. The authority, or that person's loyalty, the child's loyalty, is switched switched away from the family towards their peers, and this is the big problem, towards the peers and the state. So they go to a state school. Who do they end up serving? They become status, but they look at their peers as well, and they start to serve them too. And so their parents start to become irrelevant in their own lives, because their whole lives are wrapped up in this school system and the peers that they meet there, their friends. Now, we're not against people having friends, but we're selective about our children's friends as we homeschool. because we don't want them to lose their faith, to be introduced to sinful things. And so that's our responsibility. We're told to keep ourselves unspoiled from the world, and that's to us is to our children as well. Our responsibility is to protect them. And if you put them in the public schools, you can't know what they're being introduced to.
No, you're right, and that's so true. And I've heard that so many times with, people saying that, I don't know what happened to my child. Where does their loyalty lie? It seems like all they care about is, themselves and being with their friends, and there's no more respect for the parents. And we're seeing that on such a large scale. I mean, these children, just go to any mall. I just encourage you to go to a mall and just sit on a bench for a half hour and just watch the kids go by. Look what they're doing, what they're talking about. I mean, we are basically raising a nation of godless children who have no respect for anybody but themselves and their interests and their desires. And that's so true, Colin. And I know our time's getting short, so I wanted you to put out there right now, number one, how can we get this movie? Where can we, get more information about your organization? And then number two, what's going on with you guys? Where are you going to be at?
Well, the first thing people can do is visit our website, which is indoctrinationmovie.com. If they go to indoctrinationmovie.com, they can see the trailer and some clips, and they can buy the movie there. And they can also find out about our screenings, because this is really what we're doing right now. We're trying to initiate a grassroots campaign. We don't have a huge budget for advertising, but we realize that doesn't really matter, because the people that know who should see this film are the ones who are coming out to these screenings. And it's not me that knows. I don't know everyone that needs to see this film, but we really want to meet those public school and Christian parents. And we believe that that's a responsibility on your audience, on the people that hear about this project, to get it to the right person. Everyone, even if they're a homeschooler already, they know a handful of people that need to see this film, because we really need to love our neighbor and love our Christian friends and love our families by warning them about things that are going to hurt their children. So if you can get a copy of our film and hand it to the person that needs to see it, that is how we're going to get change here. And our film is designed to be that tool, to be a tract, in a sense, about with all the information that they need to hear, and we take the flack instead of you. So it's not as difficult to bring the subject up. We're going to be doing screenings. In fact, we have a big one coming up in Florida on Friday, March 30th at the Tampa Convention Center, and you can sign up for that at balancingthesword.com/indoctrination, and I'll be there. And the best part of those events is we screen the film. It's free to see the film, and you can come and meet me, and I'll give you all the time and answer all your questions. And that's always been a really enjoyable time. And that's really what we're doing right now. We're traveling around the country. If you want a screening in your area, just let us know. And we don't charge for screenings. You can screen the film in your church or any group that you organize. And I'm always willing to come out there if possible and talk about the film. So that's what we're encouraging people to do.
And Colin, I just want to thank you so much for all that you're doing and for coming on the show today. You are a really valuable friend of this show. And anything that we can do to help you, just know that we're here for you, and we'll be praying for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. God bless.
Hi, my name is Ron Alston. I'm founder of Living Truth Ministries, or LTM. You may have heard me a few times on the Tough Love Show. I'm a great fan of HIA Radio and the Tough Love Show. It truly lives up to its name, as Pastor Ray Tolman keeps us informed of the current events that are unfolding before our eyes, and brings us in focus of what the Bible says about our world today. Pastor Ray puts out that tough love message and that be ready message. If this program has been a blessing to you, or maybe just get your blood to boiling as it does mine sometimes, then I ask that you help support the Tough Love Show. So grab your pen and paper as Pastor Ray tells us how you can donate to the Tough Love Show.
You can go to our website at hiaradio.com and make a donation or purchase a love gift. You can also contact us at 888-959-7633. Or you can send your check or money order made out to Hope is Alive to P.O. Box 350-232, Palm Coast, Florida 32135-0232. Thank you in advance for your support.